Welcome everybody, I'm Josh Fenton. We're at GoLocal Live and we're in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm here with United States Senate Republican candidate Bob Flanders. A big win last night in the Republican primary. You get the vote out, big vote getter, big margin. You actually did have an opponent in the primary.
I did, but it was gratifying to see the support. I had the backing of the party. And I hope a lot of independents, because I'm certainly going to need a lot of independent voters to win the general election. But it was very gratifying to take 88% of the vote and to be the highest vote getter on the Republican side of the ticket.
We're on to November in the Bill Belichick on to Cincinnati type of, this is a big Senate race. It's a competitive race. I think people are starting to take notice to it. You've broken some media. You've got I think many people call it a clever spot, raising the issues of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, the Democratic incumbent, and his focus on one major issue. And I think your spot sort of says, hey, climate change is an important issue, but it's not the only issue. Talk a little bit about that approach of taking him on straightforward, right early on in the campaign.
Yeah, I think he's made over 212 speeches in the Senate, largely to empty Senate chambers about this one subject. I think Rhode Islanders, families, small businesses, seniors want to hear about the everyday problems that they consider, not global alarming. They want to know what we're going to do about infrastructure, what are we going to do about health care, that's still hanging fire, what are we going to do about immigration. All of these issues are of great importance, bringing down drug prices, cheaper health care plans. So I think his singular focus on this one issue has, I think, signaled to people that he's not really helping us in the ways that we want a senator to help us, particularly in a context where we have an all-Republican controlled administration. We have industries like the fishing industry, the defense industry, jewelry, small businesses, manufacturing, high tech. We need an advocate down there who's going to be able to have a seat at the table with these folks. So I think we've been well served in the past, Josh, when we've had somebody like a Senator Chafee down there working with a Democratic counterpart. I think it would behoove Rhode Islanders to have some balance finally and have at least one Republican congressperson down there to advocate on their behalf.
Well, having worked down there for two, what would now be called certainly moderates, George Mitchell and John Chafee, there was much more bipartisanship in the United States Senate through the 80s, kind of into the 90s, and then the world exploded and we've got sort of polar division. Talk a little bit about how you see yourself being able to transform and instill that. Right now it seems like the entire United States Senate's down to one centrist or two, Murkowski from Alaska and Susan Collins from Maine. It's a pretty thin party when they want to get together and have the meeting of the moderate Republicans. Talk a little bit about that role and the importance of bridging bipartisanship on that.
You hit the nail on the head, because that to me is where I want to be. I want to be in the center, working with both parties on bipartisan solutions. Look, that in the Senate, you have to have 60 votes to get anything done on these issues.
Right.
So that means you have to have compromise. You have to have people from both parties agree on health care, on infrastructure, on all of these issues that are crying out for some solution. Otherwise, you get nothing done. So that means you've got to work with these folks. You've got to be able to trade with them and give them something, and you give something, and you come up. That's how they used to do it. Remember when Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan used to sit down after a hard day going at it, and they'd work out a deal? We got to get back to those days. I don't believe for a second that those days are forever gone. So I want to be a bipartisan senator that will work with all parties and work with the president when it's in our interests in Rhode Island and the country, but I'm going to buck him and stand up to him if he's not.
Just when you reference the 60 votes, to end debate on the United States Senate floor by rule, you need to get a cloture vote, and you need 60 in the affirmative to end the debate to be able to really move anything forward. Right now, probably the biggest issue on the Senate side is Supreme Court nominee, and your opponent, Senator Whitehouse, serves on the Judiciary Committee. He's been already, I believe, on the record in opposition
Yes.
to his nomination. Talk a little bit about Kavanaugh's appointment and how the Judiciary Committee and the Senate should be handling that nomination.
Well, yeah, I think Judge Kavanaugh has got a superbly qualified background. He's been on the second highest court in the country, in the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. He's got a long record of public service. He's going to be confirmed, I'm sure of it. But what's so unfortunate is to see the way Senator Whitehouse and other Democrats use this occasion to basically turn it into a kabuki show where they would cut him off and not let him answer the questions and sort of turn it into a political football situation. And it was embarrassing. It was frightening and embarrassing, because here's the guy who maybe the only chance you get to see who our senator from Rhode Island is, and here he is being rude and offensive in the way he's questioning this man and glowering at him as if he's a criminal in the dock. To me, it was alarming, it was embarrassing, and it was disgraceful. And it's too bad, because he wasn't alone. Kamala Harris and Cory Booker did the same. So I think these hearings have unfortunately become a mudslinging fest instead of questioning the guy reasonably, taking into account his background. And let's face it, elections matter. Presidents have a right to pick somebody with a judicial philosophy that may be different than what a Democratic president would pick. That's for sure. But let's not turn it into an occasion to stone whoever is the nominee and see if he has the fortitude to withstand that sort of a disgraceful barrage.
Certainly, voting in the affirmative or negative on a United States Supreme Court justice is far above my payroll. But I think there is one point to note in Judge Kavanaugh's consideration before the Senate, I think 12 years ago. Then Senator Lincoln Chafee voted in the affirmative for his approval and placement on the federal court. The hearings did get sort of witchcrafty in modes. Senator Harris, you mentioned, sort of took the nominee down a role and pointed that he had some improper communications with a third-party law firm. He said he didn't remember it. By the next day, she said, "Oh, I got my facts wrong," and rescinded really the intimation of it. Is it just too partisan and too sloppy? Is that really the issue? Is that nobody that the other party isn't endorsing anymore can possibly get anyone to step across the aisle? And what's the danger of that going forward? Are we going to be caught in a situation of just endless? We're now in about 10, 15 years of this real partisan divide in Congress. Approval ratings of Congress are at the all-time lowest. Once you say you can't get any lower, it still gets lower. Public's really upset with it. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it started on the judicial stuff with Judge Bork when he was. It turned into a verb. When you bork somebody, you put him through the sort of attack, and that resulted in his not being confirmed. But it's a symptom of what's going on down there. It's the hyper-partisanship that I'm running against. I'm trying to get back to the days when there was more civility, when there was more exchange, more compromise, because that's the way legislation works. Legislation is ultimately a compromise to try and get to a position that most people can support. And I think it's so important to have bipartisan support, particularly for these issues that are so divisive on a national basis. Because if one party proposes Obamacare or what the Trump health care plan, both were only supported by one side or the other.
Right.
They're doomed, because sooner or later, when the other side gets the upper hand, that legislation is history. So I think we got to get back to the spirit of more working together, compromising, and coming up with creative solutions. I did that in Central Falls. I went in there. God knows there was all sorts of problems. But we were able to work it out. We got consensual agreement, even from the retirees who had to take huge haircuts. But we were transparent about the numbers, and they agreed to it. And we were in and out of there in 13 months, and now they have a balanced budget, and they're hailing themselves as the comeback city.
Talk a little bit about if you got elected and you go down there, what committees do you need to be on to best represent Rhode Island?
Well, certainly, healthcare is big, so I'd like to work on whatever committees could help on the healthcare side. We have the worst roads and bridges in the country, so anything I can do to shore up our infrastructure would be something I'd want to work on. I want to work with small businesses. I want to be the small business candidate. Rhode Island, like many states, is geared for small business. So these are the things I want. I want to help our fishing. I want to be an advocate for our small businesses. So whatever the committees are that deal with those issues are what I want to focus on.
Tell me your pathway to victory. This is, as you stated right at the beginning, we haven't had a member of the congressional delegation who's a Republican since the end of Lincoln Chafee, taking John Chafee's seat 12 years ago now. How do you build enough support to be able to put somebody in that really wants to support your ideals, make them comfortable with supporting your ideals of bipartisanship? How do you build that consensus?
Great question. And the answer is I've got to convince people that even though there's an R next to my name, I'm not going to be reflexively supporting whatever President Trump. It's going to be my North Star is what's good for Rhode Island and Rhode Island families. I'm going to reach out to all Rhode Islanders. I have to win the independent votes. I've got to win with minorities. I'm going to be active getting their support because they want the same things that we do. They want to realize the American dream as much as any of us. And that's what I'm all about. So really, it's all about solidifying Republican support, but also, most particularly, independents and conservative Democrats who are disillusioned with the socialistic drift that they're seeing in the state party and even at the national level.
You're seeing President Trump's approval ratings falling to, I think they're now at his lowest point. He's now caught up in the last 24 hours on Puerto Rico and hurricane responses. We're at a state economically in which there's a record low unemployment, both in New England and across the country. Stock market's booming. All economic indicators are wildly positive, but yet those would be the milestones to ensure that people approved of the president's ratings or the governor's ratings in that case. And Governor Raimondo is usually under 50%, and even yesterday she had a victory, but she was at around 55, 54. Not exactly a wild mandate in her own primary. Why are folks so unhappy?
Well, it's a difference between personality and policy. On a policy basis, if we could divorce the personalities of the people behind the policies, I think, as you pointed out, we're doing quite well, frankly, on any measure practically. Right. But the personalities behind that, his mercurial tweets, the ranting at the media, the things that every day are...
Everybody rants at the media. Feel free. You're here. It's live. Go ahead. Blister away.
The fodder for all the magazines and such. I mean, so that's what I think is turning people off. And to some extent, some of that's going on in the governor's situation. So personality is one thing. On the other hand, Charlie Baker, who is aligned both from a personality and policy standpoint, is the most popular governor in the country, and a Republican in a very blue state.
Absolutely.
So you got to marry those two things, and when they're not married, you get this unfortunate disconnect between approval ratings on the politicians involved, and yet the policies are obviously working.
Have you thought about any inane tweets that you could blister out today, talking about hurricane preparation or anything like that? Has that been in consideration? Is any of your staff contemplating that as well?
I am trying to divorce myself from the business of inane tweets. Thank you. I don't think they work, and that's not really where I want to go.
I'm sure we're going to see you again over the next few weeks. Senator Whitehouse is running television commercials. We've talked about yours a little bit. You've sort of pointed out in your spot that he doesn't really care anything about other than one issue, climate change. On the flip side, he's running a very soft spot, talking about his relationship with the family up in Woonsocket, and how much they appreciate his efforts on behalf of fighting for health care issues. That's a pivot for him to talk about healthcare issues. You know, if you were going to say what's some of the things that he has done well for Rhode Island?
Well, I think he's aligned himself with the Democratic majority. Certainly during the Obama years, he and Jack Reed were well positioned to do what they could. But now that the shoe is on the other foot, I think he's struggling to figure out how can he be helpful.
Right.
Well, I'm sure as a senator you can still do a lot. My view is that without working across the aisle in the way I hope to do, you really can't be as helpful as you need to be as a senator. And unfortunately, I think most Rhode Islanders view him as a Johnny One Note, and not being somebody that is helpful in a way that they would hope their senator could be. And so I think what I'm hearing out on the campaign trail is, where is the guy? We never see him. We don't hear from him. He shows up once every 6 years, like some locust coming to feast on us. And you know, we need a senator who's working all the time for us. So that's what I'm hearing. And you know, I don't know where he's been helpful, except to pontificate about healthcare and be a doomsday practitioner of that art.
I'm going to take that you're undecided about Sheldon Whitehouse's reelection.
You are so astute.
That locust comment seemed to be that you have some questions about his appropriate service in the United States Senate. Bob Flanders, I want to thank you for coming in. We enjoy when you come in. We hope we'll have you back a couple more times over the next couple months as the campaign heats up. You know, last night was primary night. By today, there's already, I think, 3 or 4 controversies on a number of different issues that are sparking. So there was no rest for the weary. There's no rest for you. Best of luck with the campaign, and we'll see you shortly. Stay right here. We'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to have independent candidate for governor,